The thing about being invisible is that you see everything. Dr. Marcus Webb didn't notice Elena Reeves standing 3 feet behind him when he told the surgical resident that the night shift nursing staff was basically furniture with pulses. He didn't see her jaw tighten, didn't catch the way her fingers went white around the medication cart she was organizing. Elena had become very good at being invisible over the past 4 years, good enough that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Almost. She was 41, worked the graveyard shift at Mercy General in Portland, and had a pronounced limp that made the younger nurses whisper when she walked past. The limp was from a car accident, they assumed, maybe a bad knee replacement. No one asked, and Elena never told them the truth, that the scar tissue in her right leg was from a mortar fragment, that the titanium rod holding her femur together had been installed in a field hospital outside Ramadi, that the reason she sometimes flinched at the sound of the pneumatic doors wasn't PTSD, it was pattern recognition. Those doors sounded exactly like a rotor wash. "Reeves, you're blocking the crash cart." Elena stepped aside without a word, her eyes down, letting Dr. Webb brush past. He was the hospital's top cardiac surgeon, brilliant hands, ego the size of Oregon. At 36, he'd already published in 3 major journals and performed a transplant on a tech billionaire's daughter. He was also the kind of doctor who thought nurses existed to fetch coffee and validate his genius. Though Elena had noticed, in quieter moments, the way his hands shook slightly before major surgeries, the way he snapped at people when he was afraid. Arrogance, she'd learned in the military, was often just fear wearing expensive shoes. Elena went back to restocking supplies, gauze, saline flushes, IV catheters. The rhythm of it was meditative. She'd learned in the Navy that you could survive anything if you broke it into small, manageable tasks.
Breathe, stock, count, move. The ER was unusually quiet for a Friday night. Just the normal background hum of monitors, hushed conversations, someone's grandmother watching Wheel of Fortune on mute in Bay 4. Then the scanner on the charge nurse's desk crackled to life. "All units, we have a mass casualty event on Highway 26, approximately 12 vehicles involved, multiple critical injuries, all area hospitals prepared to receive." The charge nurse, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, started barking orders immediately. "Clear bays 1 through 6, get the trauma team down here, move people." Elena felt the shift in the room, the controlled chaos before the actual chaos. She'd seen it 100 times. But then something happened that she hadn't seen in 4 years. The doors didn't open with an ambulance. They exploded inward with 4 men in tactical gear. Not hospital security, not police, military. Elena recognized the loadout instantly. Plate carriers, fast helmets, suppressed sidearms. The patches on their shoulders were deliberately obscured, but the way they moved, silent, efficient, lethal, told her everything she needed to know. These weren't regular infantry. The lead operator was a mountain of a man, easily 6'5", with a scar running through his left eyebrow. He scanned the room with the mechanical precision of someone trained to identify threats in under 2 seconds. His eyes locked onto Dr. Webb. "Where's your head of emergency medicine?" Webb bristled. "I'm the senior attending on duty. You can't just—" "Not you." The operator's voice was flat. "I need the combat-certified flight surgeon registered to this facility." Patricia stepped forward. "Sir, we don't have any military surgeons on staff. This is a civilian hospital." The big man pulled out a tablet, swiped twice, and turned it around. On the screen was a personnel file. Elena felt her stomach drop, because staring back from that screen was her own face. Younger, sharper, hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing Navy khakis and the wings of a flight surgeon.
Lieutenant Commander Elena Reeves, MD, Special Operations Medical Officer, call sign Viper 7. "That's impossible," Patricia whispered, looking between the screen and Elena. "Reeves isn't a doctor, she's a nurse." "Wrong." The operator's eyes found Elena across the room. "She's both, and we need her, now." The room went silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward the night shift nurse who emptied bedpans and refilled saline bags. Elena stood frozen, her hand still gripping a box of IV catheters. Dr. Webb laughed. It was a sharp, disbelieving sound. "You're telling me that her, the woman who can barely keep up on rounds, is some kind of special forces medic?" The operator didn't look away from Elena. "Ma'am, we have a situation 40 miles north. A Black Hawk went down in the mountains during a training exercise. 5 critical casualties. The assigned flight surgeon is one of them. We need you to fly in, stabilize, and extract." Elena's mouth went dry. "I'm not active duty anymore." "You are now." He pulled a folded document from his vest. "Emergency recall authorization signed by SOCCOM. You've been reactivated for the next 72 hours. "I can't," Elena's voice cracked. "My leg. I can't run. I can't." "We don't need you to run." The operator's tone softened just barely. "We need you to do what you did in Fallujah, what you did in Kandahar, what you did when Lieutenant Garrett took shrapnel to the femoral and you held pressure for 40 minutes under sniper fire." Elena's breath hitched. How did he know about Garrett? "Ma'am," the operator took a step forward, "one of the men in that wreck is Captain Miles Garrett, your old combat rescue officer. He's asking for you." The world tilted. Miles. She hadn't spoken to him in 4 years, not since the night she'd medically retired, not since he'd visited her in the VA hospital and promised her that she'd fly again. She'd stopped believing him after the 3rd surgery failed. "He's stable?" Elena asked quietly. "For now, but the weather's turning. If we don't get a trauma surgeon up there in the next 30 minutes, we lose the window. We lose him." Elena looked down at her scrubs, at the hospital badge clipped to her chest that said RN, night shift. Then she looked at Dr. Webb. He was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. She reached up, unclipped the badge, and set it on the medication cart. "I need 5 minutes to change."
The Black Hawk was exactly as Elena remembered. The smell hit her first. Jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, and the faint metallic tang of gunpowder that never quite left military aircraft. The crew chief handed her a flight suit and helmet without a word. She changed quickly, ignoring the pain screaming from her right leg as she pulled on the tactical boots. The suit was slightly too big. She'd lost weight since her discharge. The operator who'd pulled her from the hospital introduced himself as Master Sergeant Dalton Cross. He briefed her while the rotors spun up. "Crash site is in the Cascades. Training exercise went sideways when they hit unexpected turbulence and clipped a ridge. Bird went down hard in a ravine. No hostile fire, but the terrain is hell. 60-degree slopes, loose rock, 0 room for a landing." "How are you getting me in?" Elena asked, pulling the helmet on. "Fast rope, 60-foot drop." Her stomach clenched. Fast roping with a bad leg was a recipe for disaster, but she didn't argue. "Casualties?" Dalton handed her a tablet. 5 names. 3 were stable, 1 was critical with suspected internal bleeding, and then there was the 5th, Captain Miles Garrett. Spinal trauma, suspected C4, C5 fracture, partial paralysis.
Elena's hands trembled as she read the details. If his spine was compromised, moving him wrong could end everything. "How long until we're on station?" she asked. 4 minutes. The crew chief slid the door open. Cold air and the deafening roar of the rotors flooded the cabin. Below, the dark shapes of mountains rose like broken teeth against the moonlit sky. Elena clipped into the safety line and moved to the edge. She looked down. 60 feet of empty air. Darkness, the faint glow of chemical lights marking the crash site, and somewhere down there, Miles was dying. "On my mark," the crew chief shouted. Elena gripped the rope. She thought about the last time she'd done this. Helmand Province, a rooftop extraction under fire. She'd been 37, healthy, fearless. Now she was 41, broken and terrified. But Miles was down there. "Go! Go! Go!" Elena stepped into nothing. The rope burned through her gloves. Her bad leg screamed as she tried to control the descent. 50 feet, 40, 30. She hit the ground hard, her right knee buckling. Pain exploded white-hot up her spine. But she didn't fall. A figure materialized from the shadows, a young corpsman, barely 20, his uniform covered in blood. "Ma'am, thank God, we've been trying to stabilize Captain Garrett, but he's—" "Show me." The crash site was worse than she'd imagined. The Black Hawk had rolled twice before slamming into a boulder. The fuselage was crumpled like a beer can. Debris was scattered across 100 yards of rocky slope.
And there, lying on a thermal blanket with a sea collar around his neck, was Miles Garrett. He looked older, gray at the temples, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But when he saw her, he smiled. "Took you long enough, Viper." Elena dropped to her knees beside him, her trauma bag already open. "Shut up and let me work." She assessed him quickly, pupils equal and reactive, breathing shallow but steady, blood pressure low but not critical. The real problem was his legs. "Can you feel this?" She pressed on his left foot. Nothing. Right foot. Nothing. "Miles, I need you to wiggle your toes." He tried. She saw the effort in his face, the way his jaw clenched, but his feet didn't move. "It's bad, isn't it?" he asked quietly. Elena didn't lie to him. "Your spine is fractured. I don't know how bad yet, but if I move you wrong, I could make it permanent." "Then don't move me wrong." She almost laughed. That was Miles, calm under fire, confident even when staring down paralysis. She pulled out the portable ultrasound, running it over his abdomen. Internal bleeding in the spleen. Not catastrophic yet, but it would be if they didn't get him to surgery soon. "I need to stabilize your spine before we can extract you," Elena said. "I've had worse." "Liar!" She worked quickly, packing his torso in a vacuum splint. The other casualties were stable enough for the medevac team to handle, but Miles needed a surgeon's touch. And then the wind shifted. The crew chief's voice crackled over the radio. "Viper 7, we have a problem. Weather front moved in. Visibility dropping. We've got maybe 2 minutes." Elena looked up. The stars were disappearing behind a wall of black clouds. "Can you get him on the hoist?" "Negative. Wind's too high." Elena's mind raced. If they left now, Miles would wait for ground extraction. Hours he didn't have. She looked at the shattered helicopter, at the winch assembly still attached to the roof. What if we rig him from the crash site? "Explain."
"The Black Hawk's winch is still operational. Hook him to it, pull him up with your bird hovering overhead." Dalton's voice cut in. "That's insane." "It'll hold. I've done it before." Silence. Then, 90 seconds. Elena turned to the young corpsman. "I need the winch cable from the wreck, now." They worked with frantic precision. Elena secured Miles to the rescue basket, triple-checking every connection. Above them, the Black Hawk descended, fighting the wind. "Cable's ready," the corpsman shouted. Elena hooked the winch to the basket. "Lift!" The cable went taut. The basket lurched upward. The wind hit. The basket swung violently toward a jagged outcropping. Elena didn't think. She grabbed the basket with both hands and threw her full weight against it. Her bad leg shrieked in protest, but she held on. The basket steadied. 30 feet, 40, 50. Strong hands pulled Miles into the helicopter. The cable went slack. Elena looked up. The basket was gone. She was alone on the mountain. The medevac team pulled Elena up 60 seconds later, but by then the adrenaline had worn off. She collapsed in the helicopter. Her leg wasn't just hurting anymore. Something had torn. She could feel the wetness inside her boot. Blood or fluid, she wasn't sure. Dalton pressed a cold pack against her knee. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the stupidest." "Both," Elena gasped, her vision blurring at the edges. When they landed at Mercy General 22 minutes later, she couldn't stand without help. The same hospital she'd been pulled from an hour ago, but this time the entire trauma team was waiting. Dr. Webb was at the head of the group, scrubbed and ready. He looked at Elena as the crew carried Miles out on a stretcher. His eyes flicked to her leg, to the way she was leaning heavily on Dalton's arm. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain, maybe even concerned. "Reeves, he has a C5 fracture and internal bleeding," Elena cut him off, her voice tight with pain. "You need to stabilize the spine before you touch the spleen. If you don't, you'll paralyze him."
Webb's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I know the protocol." "Do you?" Elena's voice was cold despite the tremor in her hands. "Because 3 months ago, you told the nurses that spinal precautions were overly cautious." Webb's face went red, but something else flickered there. Shame, maybe. Recognition. "That was—" He stopped, started again. "I'll consult with neurosurgery immediately." "Good." Elena watched them wheel Miles into the OR. Then she tried to walk to the break room. Her leg buckled on the 3rd step. Dalton caught her before she hit the floor. "Easy, Commander." "I'm fine." "You're bleeding through your boot." She looked down. He was right. Dark red was seeping through the leather. They got her to a wheelchair. By the time Patricia found her in the break room, Elena's leg was elevated and wrapped in ice, her flight suit unzipped to the waist. "They're asking for you upstairs," the charge nurse said quietly. "Administration wants to know what happened." Elena laughed bitterly, then winced at the pain it caused. "I saved a man's life, that's what happened." "They're saying you practiced medicine without a license." "I have a license. It's just been inactive." Patricia sat down across from her. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Elena was silent for a long moment. "Because when you're broken," she said finally, "people stop seeing you as anything else. I didn't want to be the wounded veteran. I wanted to be normal." "You were never normal, Elena. You were just hiding."
Miles Garrett woke up 3 days later in the ICU. The first thing he did was wiggle his toes. They moved. Elena was sitting in the chair beside his bed when he opened his eyes. "Hey, Viper," he said hoarsely. "Hey, yourself. Did I dream it, or did you actually body check a rescue basket on a mountain?" "You dreamed it." "Liar." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Miles asked the question she'd been dreading. "Why'd you quit?" Elena looked at her leg. "I couldn't do the job anymore." "Bullshit! You just did the job, better than anyone." "I got lucky." "Elena," Miles reached for her hand, "you didn't get lucky. You got good, and you stayed good. The only person who doesn't see that is you." Before she could respond, there was a knock on the door. Master Sergeant Dalton Cross stepped in, followed by a woman in a Navy uniform with the rank of captain. "Lieutenant Commander Reeves," the woman said. "I'm Captain Sarah Chen, Naval Special Warfare Command. I've been asked to deliver a message." Elena stood, wincing as her leg protested. Captain Chen handed her an envelope. Inside was a set of orders. "Reactivation, permanent status assignment, Special Operations Medical Training Center, Coronado. Position, Chief Instructor, Combat Medicine. Rank, Commander."
Elena stared at the paper. "They want you back," Captain Chen said. "Not in spite of your injury, because of it. You know what it's like to fight through pain, to adapt. That's what we need to teach." Elena looked at Miles. He was grinning. "Told you," he said. 6 months later, Elena stood in front of a class of 30 Navy corpsmen at Coronado. She didn't hide her limp anymore. It was worse now, actually. The mountain had cost her another surgery, another round of pins. She'd need a cane soon, the doctors said. She used it. "Pain is information," she told them. "It tells you something's wrong, but it doesn't tell you to quit. I shattered my femur in Iraq. I was told I'd never work again. Last year, I extracted a casualty from a mountain in a blizzard." She paused.
The difference between surviving and thriving isn't about being unbroken. It's about refusing to let the broken parts define you. One of the young corpsmen raised his hand. "Commander, is it true you worked as a nurse for 4 years?" Elena smiled. "Best training I ever had. You want to be a good combat medic? Learn to be invisible. Watch, listen, see the things everyone else misses." After class, she walked to the flight line. Slower now, more careful. A Blackhawk was waiting, rotors already spinning. Dalton Cross leaned out of the crew door. "Ready, Viper?" Elena climbed in, her movements uneven, painful, deliberate, but she climbed. And as the helicopter lifted into the California sky, she felt something she hadn't felt in 4 years. She felt whole. Not because she was healed, but because she was flying. Even if some part of her knew, had always known, that she'd left something on that mountain she'd never get back. Even if she still woke up some nights, alone in the dark, wondering what invisible meant. Still, she was flying.